Hi, welcome back to the Unsold Podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Now, this guest is from the land of the Ute, Victoria Bitter, Nicole Kidman, Russell Crowe, and a cricket team who beat us Indians in the recently concluded ODI World Cup. Now, geez, I thought I'll feel different about it, but it looks like I need more time to process the defeat. Right. Okay. Now, before I introduce our guest today, I want to talk about something. You see, B2B success, sales success is completely dependent on how well we know our buyers. Right? It is true that B2B leaders and founders bring a lot of know-how and knowledge, especially about the industry and the buyers to the table. And there is this natural tendency to say, we know enough. Let's drive marketing and sales with what we know, without making an effort to validate what we know or to add to it. Now, today's guest earns his bread by doing just this, to understand why B2B companies win deals or lose deals. Okay, let's talk to him. Welcome, Joshua. Thank you so much for your time. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me, Santosh. It's a great introduction, one of the best ones I've had so far. I'm excited to chat with you, and commiserations for the loss. It was a great game.
Right, yeah, it truly was. I think that was the peak of. See, we have always seen Australia as a truly competitive team, but to play in such a way and in India on a turning pitch, I think it was remarkable. It was really
Amen.
remarkable.
Yep, 100%.
Right. All right, let's get started. Okay, Josh. Now, I'll begin with a very simple question. Can you give us a background about what you do? What did you do before? When did you start your new journey as a consultant who does win-loss analysis?
Sure thing. Yeah. So I'll kind of go back to the start, and I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. So I started my career out of university in working for a large enterprise here in Australia, and it was in their market research department. So it was very traditional market research. Think very large scale surveys, focus groups, old school market research, and I enjoyed the insights and kind of getting to those aha moments, and you'll see where I got the name for my company, perhaps. But I didn't like sitting behind a screen and crunching numbers as much. I loved the human aspect of research, and so I pretty quickly moved into more kind of qualitative research roles within the kind of like the product strategy space. So really leaning into my research skills to inform product strategy. And I then moved across to the US. I spent a number of years living in the US, working in some kind of small to medium-sized consulting companies, working with some early stage to kind of growth stage startups. And a lot of the work that I was doing there was helping them and their go-to-market teams kind of better understand through research why their customers were using their products so that they could make improvements to all aspects of their business, not just their marketing and sales, but their product strategy, customer experience, all those types of things. And so I got a lot of experience working with these go-to-market teams, and I saw some of the struggles they had in terms of like understanding really why buyers did what they did. And it sounds kind of crazy, but you know, there's the real disconnect between what the seller thinks they know and what the buyer says is true about why they do or don't buy solutions. And as you kind of pointed out, if you understand these things, it's a real competitive advantage. And so there was a kind of a bit of a gap in the market that I saw, and a real need to help these kind of customer-facing teams, marketers and sales teams, really better understand why they're winning and losing deals. And we can go into a little bit later, like why they don't currently. But that's where AHA Research, the name of my company, came from, was kind of helping them unearth those insights, those data points that aren't immediately obvious to them. And so I do that through win-loss interviews. And as you kind of talked about, you know, win-loss interviews is really analyzing why you're winning and losing deals. And it's focused at a very specific point in the the buyer's journey or the sales process, if you flip it to the sales side of things, really up until the point of making a decision to buy or not a solution, and what happens leading up to that process. And if you can understand that as a salesperson or as a marketer, then you're in a really good position to improve the experience, improve the process, and ultimately win more deals. And that's essentially what I'm doing for my clients at Aha Research.
Right, fantastic. I think this moves our conversation nicely forward. Can we talk about? I saw one of your LinkedIn posts recently, I think a few weeks ago, where your post beautifully articulated where B2B sales is lost and how B2B SaaS companies assume they are lost. Can we talk about that? Where do you think B2B SaaS sales are lost?
So I think there's a few things. So there's the number of things that kind of I think are worth pulling out of that. So I think they already know, sales teams already think they know their buyers. They know their ins and outs. That's their job, right? Their job is, as a salesperson, if you're kind of good at what you do, is to understand your buyers' ins and outs. And so there's almost like this belief that I know everything as a salesperson. I know exactly why we won. I know exactly why we lost. And the data shows that that's actually not entirely true. And I'll go into that why in a second. There's also I think there's this like worry or concern for going and getting feedback directly from the buyer. And so they kind of push it to the side and stick their head in the sand sometimes, rightly or wrongly. But I think that's part of it as well. And I think there's also like the idea that the seller knows best. The seller knows what the buyer needs. The buyer doesn't know what the buyer needs. And I think that's a really kind of self-centric view of the world. But I think kind of they are some of the reasons why, going back to, I think your question was around, analyzing. Oh, sorry, what was the question again? Just to clarify.
Right. So there's this tendency to say B2B SaaS companies pitch their product to, let's say, 5 different buyers from 5 different companies, and then 4 of them are lost. It's easy to think from a reductionist point of view and say, right, they don't have the budget right now, and that is why we lost this particular deal. Or they may not be concerned about solving this problem in this quarter or this year. Maybe that's why we lost. But actually, if we peel the curtains and look behind, right from their first digital touch point, when did they land on the website? What did they even understand about our pitch, about our solution? And then going forward, maybe price or the lack of urgency to solve is not the actual reason why they did not decide to solve the problem. So the idea was, your post beautifully captured that. So there are different stages where a prospect can drop off.
Yeah.
But tracking this will truly tell us where they dropped off. And then we can do the analysis of why and what we can do. I think that's what we was getting. And I think you did touch upon the important aspects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just one other point to, I think, just to touch on quickly is, I think a lot of times when these organizations do analyze losses, it's typically at those late stage losses. So like they've gone all the way through the sales pipeline up until, they might have even kind of experienced a pilot and then decided, no, we're not going to proceed. And they are the losses they analyze. They don't typically look at or consider some of these more early stage losses, so to speak, which is kind of like earlier on in the pipeline. And I think that's certainly a missed opportunity, because I mean, the more you can fill the pipeline with qualified leads, the better. So I just wanted to touch on that as well. It's something that I see often.
Absolutely, that's right. I think I want to take a few steps back from the sales process itself and talk about the ICP. This goes back to another post you put on LinkedIn talking about just listing the industry, the company type, the leader, or the person as the ICP is not good enough, or maybe it's just halfway through. Why it is very, very important to understand the goals and objectives of this particular person completes our definition of ICP. Can we talk about that? What are your thoughts on why poor defining ICP has a direct impact on poor or good conversions at the end of the sales process?
Yeah, I think that was kind of, you see a lot of kind of the conversation around who people targeting or are targeting is around like demographic in the case of like B2C, but firmographic in the case of B2B businesses. And yes, they're kind of valuable, especially in kind of understanding how you target these people. So, and the types of people that you want to target, especially in the days, through like, LinkedIn filters, you can kind of look at some of those criteria. But I see ICP as kind of a multifaceted subject that has many kind of inputs. And I guess the point that I kind of raised in my post is that to kind of get them in the door, some of those things are important, like firmographics, but to truly kind of connect with these people, and they are actually people on a deep level, you kind of have to really understand what is driving them, what is really driving some of their decisions, what's driving their behaviors, their emotions, and things like that. And so when you do that, you now have a more complete picture of who your ICP is, and you put all these things together essentially to paint the picture that you need to paint to get them all the way through the process. Because I do believe bits and pieces of the data that we talked about that kind of make up an ICP, get them through different parts of the process. But those who win, businesses that win, really understand all different aspects, and not just firmographics, and not just like goals and behaviors, pain points, jobs to be done. There's a number of different things that kind of go into it, and the work that I do is really trying to kind of fill in some of the blanks that people have, especially on like the qualitative side of things. Like, what are their pain points? What are the emotions they're feeling? What's driving their behaviors? What are they worried about? What are their anxieties? Those types of things. And if you understand that, those are the things that can inform your messaging, your positioning, your products, your roadmap, all those types of things. Your firmographics, they're useful, but for very different reasons. And so when you talk about completing the full picture of the ICP, you have to think about all these things in combination. Otherwise, you're only going to get halfway or worse, quarter of the way there, so to speak.
Right. And also, I want to sympathize with my B2B SaaS sales as well as marketers, brothers and sisters, especially at the early stages, because come on, this is very difficult to get attention from buyers, especially the higher up we go on the ladder within the company. It's very difficult to get their attention, get them to respond to our LinkedIn DMs, accept our LinkedIn connections, respond to our email. I mean, this is why we earn the dollars, to make sure that we do it in such a way that we don't appear pretentious or very salesy. And we'll get back to this particular point later down the line. Taking another step back, whenever a typical B2B salesperson has conversations with prospects, all the data is logged onto the CRM. Now, I do believe that you're one of the leaders who believe that there are limitations to what we can find in the CRM itself if we want to have a complete picture about the prospect. So can we talk about that? The limitations of
Yes.
CRM?
Absolutely. Yeah. So in most businesses, sales-led organizations in their CRM, they'll have a win or loss reason field mapped to the prospects essentially, and it's the job typically of the salesperson who's kind of got that, leading that prospect through the process to complete that at the end of the sales process, either closed won or closed loss. The issue is that not that those reasons exist in the CRM. It's the accuracy of those reasons. So a salesperson is just not incentivized to analyze their wins and losses. When they win, they typically go to the bank with their check, cash it out, and go sit on a beach somewhere in the Caribbean and sip on a cocktail. When they lose, they pretty quickly move on to the next kind of deal. So they're not incentivized to truly understand why they won or lost. They're also, that's just not their job as well. Like, they're sellers, right? They're not there to get impartial buyer feedback. They're there to sell. They might collect some of it, and you can imagine if a prospect decided to not go ahead with a solution, it's just natural human behavior as the prospect, the person that's giving the news, to say, it's not you, it was us, to let them down gently. And so the seller isn't getting the full story in many instances, especially when it's a lost deal. If it's a won deal, it's a different story because they won, everyone's happy. But when it's a lost deal, it's just human nature to let people down gently, and so you're not getting completely truthful responses from the sellers, and what that means is that there was a study done, I forget by who was it. It was one of the big win-loss providers that showed that the majority of the time, something like 70+% of the time, the reason code that was selected in the CRM for a loss and a win, but I think it was actually a loss, but it probably applies to wins as well. 70% of the time, that reason selected by the seller didn't match what the buyer said the reason was when they went and kind of validated it independently through a third party. And so there's a huge mismatch there between what sellers believe is true and what is actually true. And so it's fraught with danger going to your CRM as a product marketer, as a sales leader, to kind of try and understand why you're winning and losing deals for this very reason. And the only way that you can get unbiased and impartial feedback is by going directly to the buyer, and better yet, going directly to a buyer as an independent third party. And I truly believe that someone like me, an independent third party, is best positioned to collect this data because of those very reasons. It's just like it's like it's like a therapy session for them, which they're just not going to get to they're just not going to get from the person that they had that direct relationship with as part of that sales process. So yeah, I might be biased, but I think that's one of the huge points of value for bringing in someone like me, is to provide that unbiased, impartial perspective to collecting that feedback.
Right. Interesting. I think one point which you mentioned caught my attention. And as a product person from a B2B company, or even a salesperson, if I really wish to talk to prospects to truly understand why a particular deal was lost, I think we have this tendency to focus only from the product point of view, my solution, my product. So naturally, what we tend to do is, what else can I build? What new feature can I add so that I can convert you from a no, maybe, to a yes. I think this also points down to one of the examples which you quoted in one of your LinkedIn posts about what Henry Ford would have done. So, do you remember the post?
I do, yeah. It was it the quote, the Henry Ford quote
Right.
about
Yes,
if
yes.
I asked them if I asked my customers what to build, they would have said faster horses or something like that. Words to that effect.
Yes, that's right. So this is maybe why one of the reasons why a representative from the company itself may be not the right person to lead an unbiased third party view to truly
Yeah.
understand the buyer and keep the product aside, keep the solution aside, and focus only on the buyer. That way, we can unearth um, insights which can truly change not only the sales process but maybe the product roadmap itself. Who knows?
I think so. I think there's also something interesting that I've come across, and kind of, I guess, is different to how a lot of other people think. Is, there's a natural tendency from what I see, and I think you've touched on it, to add more features, to push the prospect harder, to throw more benefits at them, to add fuel to the fire, essentially. And in many instances, it doesn't matter. These things don't matter. To discount the product more and more and more. In many instances, doing these things, it's not going to get the sale over the line. What does typically work is removing things, and specifically removing friction, because in many instances, your solution is good enough from a features perspective. In many instances, it's better if they've kind of come far enough down the process, through the sales process. They've seen enough. What is holding them back is not the lack of features, the price. This is not entirely always true, but in many instances, but it's the friction that they're feeling to change, essentially. And so I think, yes, as someone who's employed by this company, and especially someone in product, they just want to build, right? Yeah, the guys and girls that are in product just want to build, and rightly so. But that's not why, in many instances, deals are lost. It's not because of these lack of things. It's because of these almost self-imposed friction to change that's stopping them. So I think that really kind of resonated what you said. This desire to build, and I think especially people in product need to kind of reconsider what is actually building for the sake of building, and what is actually building to deliver real value that's going to make a material difference and ultimately get people over the line and seal the deal.
Right. I 100% agree. I think now I want to talk about what you do with AHA Research. And I'm very intrigued to understand, do you reach out to companies, or when companies reach out to you, which type of person or leader reaches out to you, and what is your first conversation like? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, it kind of depends. It's a good question. I think there's a few buckets here. So it's really kind of, the work that I do is with customer facing teams. That's typically either marketing, product marketing specifically, or the sales team. And it might be leadership. It might be the VP of either sales or marketing. It might be the CRO, the chief revenue officer. But in many instances, it's the customer facing teams that's the one that kind of reach out, because they're the one that have in many instances, the acute pain, right? They're acting on gut instinct, they're acting on opinions, and that, for whatever reason, there's many reasons why that doesn't work. They've had enough, and they want to kind of make more data-driven decisions. Now, that's not to say that the work I do doesn't impact significantly other teams, product being one of those. senior leadership, like the CEO, the founder, boards as well is another one, customer success. But I think the ones that feel the acute pain because they're kind of at the coalface, so to speak, are sales teams and marketing teams. And look, in terms of like the scenarios, a lot of times it's because someone's recently moved to an organization, typically at a kind of like a senior level, at a leadership level, and they want to get the lay of the land. They want to understand what are the current market dynamics that are at play and use that as a foundation to build their strategy, whether it's the sales strategy, marketing strategy, or a combination of those two things. So that's like one kind of reason why someone kind of reach out, or situation where someone will reach out. The other one is when they're either a competitor is either eating their lunch or they need to eat into a competitor's lunch. And so, I'm working with a client now there is a very dominant competitor in the space that has the lion's share of the market in the industry they're in. And they've tried many things and none of it's kind of worked. What they haven't done recently is kind of understand from the perspective of the buyers what makes them good at what they do, what makes them not so good at what they do, what makes their competitors good at what they do, and also what makes them not as good as as perhaps others. And so when you know that, you're able to ground your strategy, ground your tactics in very kind of concrete and very objective data. And so that's the other kind of use case, or the other kind of reason why someone would reach out. There are plenty of others, but that's what I'm kind of mostly seeing at the moment. And I think the second one, especially so, given kind of current economic conditions, gone are the days where, VCs would kind of just throw money and you could just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what would stick. That's kind of a increasingly a thing of the past, if not already a thing of the past. And so businesses really need to make their dollars work. And if you're not analyzing your wins and losses, you're really missing out on a gold mine of data that you can use to make improvements. And it's not data that you necessarily have to go and it's not difficult to find. It's data that is, and opportunities that are sitting there right in front of you. And like any good sports team who reviews, like the Indians after the World Cup cricket loss, I'm sure they reviewed the match. I'm sure they reviewed their performance. They figured out what they did well, what they didn't do well. Any good team is going to do that. Any good organization is going to do that. And it's no different for these businesses that I work with, especially in this current climate.
Fair enough. Right. And Joshua, can we talk about what happens when somebody reaches out to you from within the company, let's say with a particular problem? And obviously it'll have subsections of problems. And what do you do afterwards? What is your next step?
Yeah, so typically, I try and understand what is the problem that they're experiencing. Like, why did they reach out? Why now? What was the triggering moment for them to reach out and get a really good understanding of what that is, and subsequently also what are they trying to understand? Like, what are the learning objectives that they have? Because that is the most critical part of win-loss analysis, is firstly identifying what is it that you're trying to learn, what is it that you're trying to understand, because that then sets the approach for everything that happens after that. It determines who you go and speak to. It determines the questions you ask. It determines how you analyze the feedback. It determines how you present, what you present, to who, all those different types of things. So it really is upfront once I have a conversation with them, what is your problem and what are you trying to understand, and where are you trying to get to, essentially. So that's kind of up front. You mentioned kind of like what happens next. Just to clarify, you talking about like after I've worked with them to understand why they're winning and losing deals?
Right. So let's say they come up with a problem statement, and then you
Yeah.
ask and probe questions to understand what you have to do next. And then you go back to the drawing board, and now the actual plan from your side, from our research starts. So I'm very keen to understand what your process is there.
Yeah, so it really is like getting the relevant people into the room and understanding what objectives do they have, and typically that's grounded in business goals that they've got for the quarter, for the year, whatever it might be. Where are their gaps in their knowledge? What assumptions do they have as well? Because we really like to test assumptions that people not have and not take it as a truth. So getting different teams into the room to kind of share their desires is a starting point. Once I have that, and once I've worked with a stakeholder to understand what are the core objectives that we have, you can't test everything. You have to kind of focus, because, like I said, what you identify as objectives has an impact for everything else that follows. And if you're set all these different types of objectives, it's going to impact everything that follows. So where possible, trying to kind of bucket objectives that are similar, that relate to the similar audience. And then from there, it really is then going and identifying who are the right people to speak with. So I know what we're trying to understand, and then naturally who then we need to go and speak with, to understand those things and answer those questions. So it'll be going to the CRM, looking at what are some of the fields that are relevant to us based on the questions that we're trying to answer, identifying the right people to speak with, making a kind of like a list of those, and then it's really about outreach, like going and then inviting those people to participate in these interviews. And that can be done in a number of different ways, typically using like an email, like automation, email outreach software. You can automate a lot of these things and send multiple emails over a period of time, inviting people. If they don't respond the first time, then 5 days later, send them another email. But doing outreach is the natural thing that follows. And in between that, also putting together a discussion guide that kind of guides the conversation that happens face to face. They're probably like the things that happen immediately after you've defined those objectives and right before you actually conduct those interviews, once they're booked on the calendar.
Right. And have you faced any challenges in reaching these people and getting to agree to sit down and talk with you? Because I'm sure all these people live busy lives at work. How difficult has it been?
It can be difficult. It depends on. It's one of the question most popular questions I get is, how do I increase the likelihood of someone speaking to me, especially not so much the wins, because they are people that you're on good terms with. They've recently signed, and so they're a lot easier to get a hold of. The losses are more difficult. I think there's a few things that you can do. Firstly, set an expectation up front, early on in the sales process, that no matter the result, we would love your feedback. We'd love to collect feedback from you, win or loss. So you're really setting that expectation up front. So when it comes time to they receive that invite, then it's not out of, it's not a surprise. They were going to expect it. They're much more likely to complete something when they expect that it's going to come than if it's a surprise. That's one thing. I think the second thing is providing an incentive. There's kind of a discussion in terms of like, do you incentivize people? Do you give them money? Do you not? I'm of the belief that you're taking these people's time, and oftentimes these people are quite senior in the business, and so their time is valuable in many instances, and so giving them compensation for their time, I think, is just it's a show of respect. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of money, but giving them something as a thank you for their time, I think, goes a long way. And if it's someone that's super senior, if it's a CEO of a company, of a large company, money might not be the answer. It might be a charitable donation. You might know that they're on a board of a foundation of some sort, and so being proactive in saying, hey, if you participate, to thank you for your time, if you participate in the interviews, we'll provide a donation of $100 to this this charity, which I know that is important to you. That's going to, I think, go a long way in getting them to participate. So that's the second thing. The third thing is following up. So following up, it's like any sales. If you send one cold outreach and you don't respond, good salesmen won't take that as a no. You have to follow up, I'd say at least 2, sometimes 3 times. I usually stop at 2, sometimes 3, depending on the people that we're reaching out to. But in many instances, just because they didn't respond the first time doesn't mean they're not interested in participating. It just means they're busy, or they went to respond and then forgot, whatever it might be. There's typically a significant portion of people that you do outreach to the second time through, say, email that respond positively to your request. So I would always encourage people to follow up, especially when you don't hear the first time. And the last one is making it very clear that the request isn't about you trying to sell them. And this is where the independent, impartial third party like me comes into play. I'm not going to sell them. I'm not interested in selling them the product. My interest is collecting their feedback. And so if you can position it that way, and if you can say, hey, we've engaged this independent third party AHA Research to conduct these interviews and collect feedback from you about your experience, they'll be the ones that are conducting the interviews, not us. We're not going to be selling you anything. That puts people at ease, because people don't want to be sold to. And when it's someone from the business reaching out, whether it's the salesperson or product marketing, even if they have good intentions, it's just not a good look. It's just perceived the wrong way by the buyer, and that might make them more hesitant to participate in the research. So they're probably like 4 things I would think about with trying to get close losses to participate in some of these interviews.
Nice, terrific. Now, were there instances where you had to reach out to prospects or customers, especially on the prospect side? Does a company come to you and say, can you reach out to you yourself and figure out what insights we can collect? Has it happened?
It has. Yeah, it has. It depends on the company. So some companies like to really kind of own the relationship, and sometimes it's just better for the correspondence to come from the business itself, and I'm just CC'd in as part of that. So yes, it does happen, but I honestly believe the correspondence best comes from the business, because there's already that touch point, there's already that relationship that exists, and also from deliverability point of view, from email deliverability, it's much more likely that the prospect will receive the email coming from someone who's already been emailing them than coming from, say, me who has never emailed them in the past. So for those reasons, I always preferred to have the client do the emailing. It's not to say I don't help them with like setting up like what is the sequence, the email sequence, like what do we want to include in terms of like a messaging within those emails, but it's best if it does come from the client. But there are instances where it has come from me. But I do certainly prefer it comes from the client for those very reasons.
Makes sense. Absolute sense. Joshua, I want to talk about one of your projects, which I came through your LinkedIn profile, the hospital story. Can we talk about that? I think there is an interesting story there. Why did they reach out to you? What was their product? As far as I understand it, they were trying to reach out to cardiologists. What happened, and how did you deliver the project?
Yeah, this is a really interesting project. I've actually worked on 2 projects like this, not both in the kind of like bioresearch space, but it's a really fascinating area. So there's essentially technology that exists these days that uses the scans from CT machines. So like if you have a suspected heart issue, or if you go to a cardiologist, they'll sometimes order a CT scan, and it's a very common scan that people get and probably familiar with. It's been around for 15, 20, maybe plus years, probably longer than that actually. So it's very well entrenched in the healthcare system globally. But there's technology now that allows essentially through machine learning and AI to turn these scans into 3D models of the heart and in many cases, better predict coronary artery disease. It looks at it from like a structural perspective, from a functional perspective as well, and just provides a lot more data and a lot more kind of predictive capability than a standard CT scan alone. And my client was trying my client was one of these early solutions. This is going back about 4 years ago, and they sold directly into hospitals. Cardiologists were their main user, not necessarily the buyer. That was typically the CFO or the CTO, the chief medical officer at these hospitals, but cardiologists were the main users. But they were facing kind of slow growth and I guess like a reluctance to adopt the technology. So that's kind of like the reason that they reached out to us was like help us better understand why that is the case and how we can position our solution in a way that's going to unlock some of that demand, which they believe was kind of sitting there waiting to be unlocked, but for whatever reason they just weren't able to kind of tap into it. So that's what the problem was that they were experiencing.
Right, understood. And what happened once you put your feet into it? What did you find out, or is this a project which is ongoing right now?
No, that this finished a while ago. So this, like I mentioned, the CT technology is been around for years. It's very well ingrained as part of like the workflow of hospitals and cardiologists. What we did was spoke to some of the losses, so people that had gone through the sales process and didn't end up purchasing. But we also spoke to people who had never gone through the sales process, but were within their target market to understand, well, what are you doing? What are you doing now? Like what is your current solution? Which is in many instances, CT scans was one of those solutions that they were using, and what's not working about that, and what would essentially kind of make you change? Like, what would you need to see in order to kind of switch to a new solution? The main insight that came from this research was that asking and pushing these hospitals and cardiologists to change their workflow was extremely difficult, even if the solution that they had was better. And it was based on the data that I saw and talked about. It is a more accurate solution than a standard kind of the CT machine. But it would mean essentially institutional wide changes to how things are done. And if like something is so well entrenched in a field in the space, it's very hard to kind of change behavior. And so instead of positioning the solution as a replacement to these CT scans, what they did was, when they found out that, cardiologists, hospitals weren't going to just do away with these CT scans and looking at those, they said, okay, that's fine. We're going to now essentially own the pathway that is CT plus their technology. And in many instances, a cardiologist will be unsure about the CT scans and kind of like the results are inconclusive. That's when we spoke to these cardiologists, they said that's when they would then go and look at engaging this solution to kind of get a more conclusive result. And so the client ended up owning that pathway. So instead of competing against the CT machines, they worked with them. And instead of pushing and saying you have to change, you have to do this, you have to do follow how we do things now, they said, no, you can continue doing what you're doing. Just when this happens, when you have an inconclusive result, then think about us, and we can kind of give you more certainty where you are uncertain about certain things. And so, these insights are often, it might sound obvious, and it often is. These insights are hiding in plain sight, and they might sound painfully obvious, but people's biases, their partiality, they really do blind clients from them. And so it was really as simple as making changes to their messaging, how they position the solution relative to other solutions out there, not only in this space, but also like these indirect solutions like the CT machine, the CT scans, and also the sales strategy to push less for swapping out the solutions and more for working with what they were already doing. And I think, they were then, I think Series C, probably valued at a couple $100 million, maybe $100 million or something like that. I think now, the last time I checked, which was late last year, they're now valued at $1.5 billion. And I'm not saying that was entirely as a result of the work that I did, but I think certainly it was a catalyst to change the way that they thought about their solution. And there's, everything else that follows obviously led up to where they've got to today. But certainly an interesting kind of way to think about things. And those types of insights are exactly the types of insights that I kind of regularly surface through the work that I do.
I think you beautifully summed it up. I think getting the other perspective from the buyer's side is, I think, the idea. Because as you said, something as simple as, obviously 8 out of 10 medical cases are complex. There is no straightforward medical case most of the times. Now sounds very obvious in hindsight. But to uncover these biases, uncover what we believe or what we don't believe, it's so crucial in this case. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you.
I mean, sales people, they have to be enthusiastic about what they do. If you're selling something, you have to truly believe in it. But that's the seller's perspective. To your point, you have to consider the buyer, which is the most important side of the equation as part of that. And they already have legacy knowledge, legacy training, legacy systems, all these things that you have to think about. And so, if you're not able to understand those things and getting their shoes, then you're not going to have much of a chance you're not going to have much success, especially in industries like healthcare, especially in the US.
Absolutely, you're right. Now, Joshua, I want to touch upon certain points about the learning curve you would have to go through. How do you acclimatize yourself into different industries, different products, different buyers? I'm sure that requires good investment of time to understand.
Yeah, so you're talking about, for me personally, how do I kind of like adapt based on the different client engagements? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a few things. There's actually, more recently, I've actually used kind of ChatGPT at the start of a project to kind of get a better understanding of not necessarily my client's solution, but more so who they're serving. And so what I do is, this is a tip or a trick for the listeners here. I go to my client's website. This is all publicly available information, so I'm not doing anything wrong. I go to every single page in their website. I Control A, select all. I think that's Control A. Copy and then paste it every single page into ChatGPT, and then I have a few prompts that basically spits out who's their ICP based on what the website says, and then digs into what are their desires, agnostic of the solution. What are their desires? What are their pain points? What solutions do they typically use? All those different types of things. So I'm able to get, separate from like what my client provides me, which they also, sometimes, not all the time, provide me with kind of their own view of these things. But I get it from ChatGPT's perspective. I get a really good understanding of the types of people that they're trying to target. And some of the things that we talked about earlier, like their behaviors, their problems, their desires, those types of things. Putting the solution to the side for the time being. I found that's a really interesting way for me to get up to speed quite quickly with not just the solution, but the buyers and what they actually likely care about. Putting the solution to the side for the time being.
Right, fantastic. I think this leads us to conclude this conversation, which has been incredibly insightful, with a very simple question for you, Joshua. Now, to all my audience, especially in the B2B SaaS segment, who may need not lead this effort on their own, but may have to get a buy-in to bring in an independent consultant. I remember you had done a very crisp video about the 4-step process to assess this, to go to a point where they can go to the leadership and say, right, now is the time we can bring somebody like you who's an independent consultant to do a win-loss analysis. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to understand how I would pitch that if I was someone internal?
Absolutely. Yes. Spot on. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the best places to start is, well, first and foremost, if you're taking a step back for a second, if you're wanting to set up a formal win-loss analysis program and it hasn't been done before your organization, I always encourage clients to start small. Start with a pilot, identify what is the highest value focus you can so what are the highest value questions you can focus on, I should say, with the lowest amount of effort. And so that requires you to get very focused if it's not going to be the least amount of effort. And whether it's they bring on me, an independent third party, to do that for them in terms of like executing on that, or if they do that themselves, that's something that I always encourage potential clients to do is focus on the lowest amount of effort with the highest amount of that's going to deliver the highest amount of value. Now, when it comes time to bring someone on like me, I think some of those facts, those data points that I mentioned around the mismatch between what sellers say is the reason, what buyers say is the reason for a loss. There's been some studies that are out there that have kind of showed this mismatch, and where there's kind of discrepancies between someone internally doing this type of analysis versus someone externally doing this type of analysis. So having some of those up your sleeve, I think is valuable. But then also looking at realistically, how much of your time is this going to take? And this isn't something that if done well is going to only take you a couple of hours. If done well, it is almost a full-time job in and of itself if you haven't done this before. Now, you can kind of get more streamlined, automate more things as you kind of get more experience. But if you're doing this for the first time, expect to dedicate a large percentage of your time to doing this. And many internal people just don't have the luxury of dropping everything that they're doing, all of the other priorities that they have, and spending the next 4 weeks essentially setting up and conducting and executing these win-loss experiments. So kind of being very clear on what the investment would be if you were to use internal resources versus what the investment would be to use external resources. That's another, I think, data point for you to bring to the table. They're probably the two main things that I would consider. Actually, the third being also just like case studies that case studies of similar organizations who have engaged the services of an external third party. So, I don't have many kind of publicly facing case studies yet. But I know if you go on, other win-loss providers' websites, so the big ones out there are like Closed and Clue. They have plenty of case studies on their website. And I think if your senior leaders can see that, hey, businesses like us have engaged these third-party providers and these are the results that they've gotten, it's very hard to then say, no, that's not for us. If there's X percent increase in win rate, decrease in sales cycles, X dollars increase in revenue as a result of these services that these providers, these win-loss providers provide, then it's really hard for senior leaders to disregard that and look at going, doing things internally, or worse, not doing anything at all. So they're the three or so things that I would recommend someone think about and bring to the table if they're wanting to have that conversation with leaders.
Fantastic. I think today's conversation has been incredibly insightful. I'm sure I do. And also I can vouch for the audience as well will pick up a terrific amount of nuggets from this. Joshua, I just want to close the conversation by saying, how can people find you?
Yeah, so main channel, just how you found me on LinkedIn. So Joshua Fryszer. So Joshua's pretty self-explanatory. Fryszer, not so much. It's spelled F for Foxtrot, R for Roger, Y for Yankee, S for Sierra, Z for Zebra, E for Echo, R for Roger. So that's Joshua Fryszer. Find me on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a DM if any questions you have. Follow me for tips. But yeah, that's the best place you can find me.
All right, Joshua, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Santosh. It's been great chatting. And yeah, I really appreciate you reaching out.
Fantastic.